Trigger warning. In the following interview, Doctor in Social Sciences Lori Handrahan discusses her most recent paper on child sex trafficking. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hi, Lori.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us. We would like to understand a little bit about your research and what encouraged you to do it, and have like a brief idea of what it is.
Right. Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate the help that you guys provided. My name is Dr. Lori Handrahan. The research is a peer-reviewed journal article in the Journal of Human Trafficking. It's just been published last week. It's a special issue in the Journal of Human Trafficking that resulted from a conference that was held at the University of Nebraska, at Creighton University in Nebraska. I think the conference was maybe 3 or 4 years ago already. Mm-hmm. So it just shows you how slow academic publishing is. It's like the pace of a glacier. And Creighton University held a conference where they invited people from around the world who were researching trafficking issues that had never been researched before. So the goal of the conference was to expand the research agenda into all forms of human trafficking and wildlife trafficking, any kind of trafficking, including human child sex trafficking, wildlife trafficking. So they invited me to present. At that point, I just had raw qualitative data that I had been posting on Medium as I was gathering it, and they had seen that, and they invited me to come and speak about that. So the research project was still very much, in the rough format. And the deal that they had with the Journal of Human Trafficking was that, anybody who presented at their conference would have the option for submitting their research and being considered in this special issue. So that's a little bit of the background. I had a pro bono tech person helping me with the NAC, and then she just got overwhelmed with work. She was a very senior tech person at a university, and she just felt very strongly about the research. So at that point, I looked on NAC, and NAC, the company itself, had a list of experts in NAC who you could contact. And that's how I found you guys, because they had several people available, and you guys looked like the most easy to work with, and also you had the best price. And there was one other person that I contacted, but they seemed very difficult to deal with. So I was really concerned about working with somebody who would understand the nature of the research project, because anytime you deal with child sexual abuse, it's a trigger, it's an emotional trigger, because globally there's so much child sex abuse that almost always I'm talking with somebody who's either a survivor themselves or a perpetrator. So I tend, whenever I engage with anybody on this research, people tend to either not want to talk about it at all, or they get very angry at me. And they're not angry at me, they're angry at the research. And
of course,
either that could be, I've been working on the issue for so long, I have a general feel. If it's somebody who I think is a predator, they tend to act very aggressively and try to diminish the research or diminish me, and be very abusive. And I sort of call that the junkyard dog tactic. If you're at a junkyard for cars, they usually have a very vicious dog. Yeah. So usually a predator will come at me, and then with people who are survivors, and we may not know that they're survivors, obviously it's their private, they tend to get very very into the research and very glad that I'm doing it. And I'm really grateful for that, because they'll just say this is really important research, and they feel very passionately about it, and it's very courageous. And usually those people are survivors, not always. Some people just care passionately about the issue, or they may know somebody who's a survivor. Maybe it was their sister or their mother or their aunt, or In any case, you guys were so wonderful to work with, and I really, really appreciated that. You were excellent in providing technical assistance, but you also were like passionate about the research and really were very, very supportive of the research. So for me, that was really important, and it was a pleasure to work with Giancarlo, and he's just been fabulous. And so from that original help on the NAC database, I just wanted to continue working with you guys. Sorry, that was a
Lori,
very long explanation.
no worries. Lori, I would like to understand a little bit more how you envision this research will help to avoid this child abuse, like at least in terms of the discussion. How you think that this research will impact?
Right. So my research is the first of its kind, and it really it makes me very angry that this should be the first of its kind, because if you're an academic, your job is to teach and research, and you're supposed to be teaching and researching about cutting edge issues that need to be discussed in society. That's your entire role as a professor. And within higher education, the entire role of higher education is to push society in better and new directions and to identify society problems.
Yeah.
I'm a social scientist, so that's even more of our job. That's the entire reason you get a social science degree, to find out about issues in society. So, you know, I don't have a degree in like Elizabethan history. I'm not looking at something in the 16th century. Social science, and it's applied social science, and it's current. And what I found was that there's way too many academics involved in this crime. And then on the other side, no academics are willing to research the crime. And that's our job, is to research the crime. So many of my colleagues would say, you're so brave to research this, or you shouldn't be looking at higher education. You should be looking at the police, or you should be looking at the military, or you should be looking at a different profession. You shouldn't be looking at us. If we can't look at ourselves as researchers and professors, we have no business in this profession. Like, we should be looking at ourselves first before we start to look at everybody else. So there was this very clear sense of, not in our backyard. Don't look at us. Don't look at professors. You're hurting higher education by publishing this data, or you won't get work. You'll be blacklisted because there's so many powerful predators within higher education, and they don't want this research to come out. So I was getting both, which was the same thing that I talked about just a little earlier, but now it was within higher education. A lot of women, female professors and professors of color would say to me, I love this research, but I can't do it because I won't get promoted, I won't get tenure, I'll be really ostracized within the university. Nobody wants to talk about this, because we know that most of the predators are white men in powerful positions in higher education, and that's what the data shows. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that absolutely answers, and give me a chance to open a little bit the conversation about. So there is a way that we can identify some, I don't know, patterns, some behaviors that are like red flags that, I don't know, for sure, at least when I was in the university, we noticed that this is something that affects more to women than men, but it's something that it's really hard to speak it out because it's embarrassing at the same time. So I'm just wondering if the research give you some red flags, some alerts that as a father or as a friend we can identify when we are in front of possible predators. I don't know.
Yeah, this is exactly it. This is why you do the research. So, you know, you hear lots of anecdotal evidence. You hear this happened to a friend, or that happened to a friend, or this professor got arrested for child pornography, or this dean, but nobody had gathered the data. And this is precisely what social science is supposed to do. Until you gather the data, you can't identify patterns. And that's what the NAC, so we had this huge qualitative database which just showed all the cases. And then, are there any patterns in the cases? So we need to get statistics from that qualitative data. And so we use NAC to try to identify, are there patterns? And there are patterns. And these patterns are the same patterns that we see in other research on child sex abuse, child sex trafficking. But just first, I have to say, it doesn't happen more to girls. in terms of
No?
child sex abuse, boys and girls are equally abused. Now, in my research, we could, if I had research money, and I don't have any money, so I've been doing this all for free. And this is the other thing about not having this research funded. If a university would fully fund this research the way they fund other research, we'd be able to get a lot more data. When we looked at the age of the victims, which is what you guys helped me do in the NAC database, John Garlow, sorry about this coming.
No worries.
He helped me look at the age of the victims because most of the victims were under 10 years old. Now, we could have gone in and then looked at how many were girls and how many were boys. That data is still available in our qualitative database, but it would take a lot more research hours to give a statistic on that. However, in terms of the literature, which I'm very familiar with, boys are also sexually abused. I think that boys are probably abused in equal or greater numbers, because if you're an adult male and you're mentoring a 6-year-old boy, everyone will say, what a great guy he's taken. I'm a single mother, I have a 6-year-old boy. The boy needs a father figure in his life. You know, this guy is his softball coach or his priest or his music teacher, and he just is taking a great interest in him. It's easier for an adult man to walk around with a 6-year-old boy. Nobody's going to think anything. But if an adult man's walking around with a 6-year-old girl taking her for ice cream, you're immediately thinking, is this guy a creep? Is he a predator? So boys, I think, are sexually abused in massive numbers, but it's very shameful for a boy to come forward and say that he was anally raped. So I think that there's an enormous amount of shame for male child sex abuse victims. Now, in the States, there's been an enormous amount of attention on the Catholic Church, where priests primarily preyed on boys because they got them to be altar boys. They got them to be involved in the youth groups. There's been a huge amount with the Boy Scouts of America where the little boys were preyed on by their Boy Scouts. So I think a lot more men in America are coming forward and saying, I was a victim. I was raped at 6 years old by this Boy Scout leader or this priest. And that's really good, because if it's only seen as an issue that affects women and girls, then the men don't get involved. And if the men don't get involved, we can't stop the crime, because the men are the majority of perpetrators. So we need men to stand up and say, I was a victim and I'm not going to be silent anymore. So I think that's very important. The data really shows that. Women as adults have been more vocal in coming forward and saying, I was sexually harassed by this professor. I was sexually harassed on the street. And what we're seeing is that men as adults tend to stay silent because they see that if they speak out against the patriarchy, they will be marginalized just like women are. And men want to get the benefits of the patriarchy that you have as a man. So you tend to be more quiet.
Absolutely.
Right. So if you're up for tenure and you're a young assistant professor and you're a white man, you're in an incredibly privileged position. And most of those men won't speak out. And that's the real problem. We need the people in power to speak out against the powerful predators. And what we're finding is it's usually women who will speak out against the powerful predators, and professors of color in America who will speak out, and then their whole careers are destroyed while the white men get put into positions of power and they stay silent. So that's a huge problem. So the other thing about what we tried to identify was patterns of the predators in higher education. Did they intentionally seek out positions where they had access to vulnerable children? Overwhelmingly, yes, it was over 50%. And we used a very conservative metric on that. So we didn't include their own children, who are their most vulnerable children, and we didn't include students at the university, who are also the most vulnerable. So if you're an 18-year-old student, or maybe you came early and you're even 16 or 17, underage, we didn't look at that because that's easy. And then we'd have almost 100%. So it wouldn't give us any useful data. So we eliminated their own children, we eliminated students, and we asked the professors who have been arrested and prosecuted for child sex trafficking, did they have positions where they volunteered to have power over vulnerable children, either in the university or in their community? So did they volunteer at homeless shelters with children? Did they work with Boys and Girls Club? Did they work with the Boy Scouts? Did they volunteer to go overseas on missions that worked with orphans? Did they work in war zones with vulnerable children? Did they volunteer to teach music for poor children in a community? Yes, overwhelmingly. So that's a huge red flag, huge
Wow.
red flag. The other thing is, was it happening on campus? So are they using their position in their workplace to gain access to vulnerable children? Yes. So in the case of one professor, he volunteered to work at a camp in the summer for asthmatic children. So children who had breathing problems and had asthma, and he was a doctor. So in addition to his university work, he volunteered for free to work at the university during the summer in a camp that the university provided for sick children. And then he was preying on those children and abusing them on campus in his professional role as a doctor or a medical profession at that university. So I think that that's very important. And that's something that the workplace could do to screen better. So daycares on campus were a huge thing. So we're people volunteering to work at the day camp on campus. And people think, what a great guy. I mean, this guy's volunteering his time to help sick children on campus. No, he's gaining access to vulnerable children. You should be screening for that. That's a major, major red flag. We also looked at awards because what we're finding in the research is that predators tend to be highly awarded and respected. So that is their professional armor, right? So you think, what a great guy. I mean, this guy's got so many awards for volunteering. He volunteers with sick children. He volunteers at the homeless shelter, all in addition to his prestigious career as a professor. No, these are he's gotten all these community awards. These are red flags because are you going to believe a 10-year-old sick and poor child from a poor family that doesn't have higher education? Or are you going to believe this highly awarded professor who does all this great volunteer work? So I think when you're looking at risk factors, somebody who's highly awarded, who volunteers a lot with vulnerable children, is not necessarily a good guy. This is somebody that you should be looking at as predatory behavior. You think of it like a drug addict. They have to have a supply line so they can access their drugs. Well, predators have a supply line to access a continual supply of vulnerable children, right? This is not a crime of opportunity where they happen to be around a 6-year-old child and they abuse that child only once. No, this is a highly structured, highly organized crime where predators have a supply line to vulnerable children. So then you think, how do predators get a supply line to vulnerable children? And this is how we framed our data, and the data showed overwhelmingly that these predators in higher education were doing the same thing that predators in other sectors were doing. They had a supply line to vulnerable children. They had a way to make themselves look like they were these remarkable human beings who shouldn't be looked at, who should have total impunity for their crimes, and were able to then get away with their crimes, usually for many, many years.
Lori, this is huge, definitely. But if we have to send a message to the people, like community, universities, what would be like the first advice that you will give us?
Yeah. Well, it depends to whom. I mean, what I would say to universities, and especially people in power in universities, is fund this research, right? I mean, if you don't have the data, there's no problem. There's only a problem if you can say, we have the data and we've identified that this is a problem. So people who don't want this data to be collected and published want there to not be a problem, right?
Got it.
So this is what social scientists are supposed to do. This is what universities are supposed to do. What I would love is I would love major funding for this research so that we could do this all over the world. So how often is this happening in Colombia? How many universities in Colombia are engaged in this crime? How many in Mexico? How many in Canada? How many in England, in Ireland, in Australia? I don't speak Spanish, so I'm only following English language, but I know it's a huge problem in Canada. I know it's a huge problem in Ireland, in the UK, in Australia, in all the English-speaking world. This is a massive problem. So, because I see the arrest records. The Colombian government, the US government, any government could also fund this. How often is this happening in our universities? Let's put some money forward. It's data that's set up so that we could do it and we could put different databases together from different countries. I think that professors in particular are very prestigious all over the world. So it's a very prestigious position. And I think it's the first position that we should be looking at in terms of workforce. But without money, we can't get the data. Data is very, very expensive to get. This data, I looked at over 10,000 pages of documentation. It took me 8 years to pull this data together. And I was only pulling from media reports, and then I had to go and I had to get the police records and the prosecution records. It's very tedious, it's very time consuming, and without funding and paid staff, we can't do this. So the most important thing is to fund the research, and that will lead to the community saying, this is a huge problem. We need more resources, we need more screening, we can't allow these predators to have impunity. Most predators will abuse over 200 children over the course of their lifetime. Most predators are protected by institutions and other predators in power, so they can continue to abuse children. Victims usually die of drug overdoses or suicides. So it's very hard to find victims who have the power and the ability to come forward. Therefore, it is our role as social scientists and professors to make sure that victims have access to the data so that victims can also say, this didn't just happen to me. It wasn't my fault. There are so many other victims and survivors out there I can network with, I can gain strength from. I can go on and live a good life and put this behind me in a way. Many people, when I was doing this research, would contact me and say, I was raped by that professor. One case in particular was a professor at Yale University. He said, I was raped by that professor when I was 6 in a community swimming pool. And he was at a different university, and we never reported it, and it never left me. And I came across your data, and I see that finally he's been put in jail all these years later. And I now have some measure of peace, but I also feel guilty that we didn't report it. Maybe we could have stopped the crime. But the thing is that most victims who come forward are destroyed, right? Because the predators have all the power, the victims have no power. So most victims aren't able to stop the crime when they come forward. If there is this kind of database available, victims can say, he did this to me too. And they will be then believed because we have all these records, right? We have public data that says this person has been a predator for many years. So this kind of data to me is the most important thing. If we don't have data, we can't stop the crime, we can't help victims and survivors, and we can't hold predators accountable.
Lori, thank you so much for this meeting. It's a little bit overwhelming and a little bit like, it's really hard when you hear those numbers, and at the same time it's encouraging because there are chances to fix this. And what I say is that we have to spread out this message so we can find another sponsors that will allow us to stop this abuse, definitely. So Lori, thank you very much for your time, and thanks.
Yeah, thank you guys for working with me. It was really wonderful to find you. If I had university funding, I just would have used my graduate assistants and I wouldn't have needed to find you guys. So it was wonderful to work with you, and I'm really grateful you're spreading the message. I think it's really important. And in your workplace, you could have a discussion about this because the data focused on predators in the workplace. I looked at higher education, but it's predators in all workplaces. So you could use that as an entry point to say, what can we do in our own workplace, especially as a tech company, to address this crime? And I'm really, really grateful. And Giancarlo should get a raise.
Giancarlo, you hear that?
Thank you so much, Fernando. Thank you, Deanna.